Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So I'm coming to you from Swanee, Georgia, just north of Atlanta on off the 85, delivering a load of frozen pizza. So let's talk a little history, a little location. So last night, I spent some time at the Loves in, I guess it's right off of 24, just north of the Kentucky-Tennessee border. So a lot of interesting stuff in that area. First of all, Fort Campbell is there. Now, Fort Campbell is technically Fort Campbell, Kentucky, because that's where the post office is. It's in the Kentucky side, but most of the post is actually in Tennessee. If you're not familiar with Fort Campbell, it is the home of the 101st Airborne Division. That's the division that was portrayed in Band of Brothers. Easy Company was part of 101st Airborne. And I think maybe the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, because I think 504, 505, and 506 are part of 101st, and 501, 02, and 03 are part of the 82nd Airborne down at Fort Bragg, Georgia. But I have to check with some of my Army colleagues to make sure I'm getting those regimental assignments correct. Also at Fort Campbell, that's where the Air Assault School is. At least it was last time I checked. So Fort Campbell's there. Saw a few military helicopters. Actually, I saw a C-130 flying by too yesterday. So also from that area in Guthrie, that's the birthplace of a guy named Robert Paine Warren. And if you don't know who he is, you should, for a couple of reasons. One is, first of all, he was the U.S. Poet Laureate, so that's a big deal in literary circles. But he is also the only person to have ever won a Pulitzer Prize for both fiction and poetry. He won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for a book called All the King's Men in 1947, and then he won Pulitzers for poetry in 1958 and 1979. So yeah, he was a big deal. He actually died and is buried up in Vermont, but yeah. So Robert Paine Warren is his name. Another person that's from that area, I think she's actually from Clarksville, is Olympic great Wilma Rudolph. Now, Wilma Rudolph's exploits actually predate my birth, but in 1960 at the Rome Olympics, Summer Olympics, she was the first American woman to ever win 3 gold medals in an Olympics. She was a graceful, fast woman. When she was running, Wilma Rudolph was 5'11" and she weighed 130 pounds. But she was an Olympic sprinter, and she kind of, paved the way for like FloJo, right? Florence Griffith Joyner, Jackie Joyner Kersee, among others. And unfortunately, Wilma Rudolph died at the age of 54 in 1994 of cancer. But she was a big deal and really fast. So that's kind of a little update, a little history. The other thing that's interesting today, though, is today's January 10th, and on this date in 1776, the best-selling piece of literature, if you will, basically proportionally in the history of people keeping track of that stuff, was published on this date. So I kind of backed into that. But basically, what happened is, on this date, Common Sense, the pamphlet by Thomas Paine, was published, and because it was so widespread and given the population and everything, it just became this huge success, and like I said, per capita proportionally, the best-selling piece of work, literature ever published. It was only 47 pages long, but it was widely disseminated and promulgated throughout the colonies. Now, keep in mind, the Revolutionary War had already started when this was published. So the Revolution, for those of you keeping score at home, started in April of 1775. That's when the British marched to Lexington and Concord, shot heard round the world, right? You've maybe heard that famous poem. So Paine writes Common Sense. He also wrote a few other pamphlets. And really, I know a lot of people that are like super conservative, like point to Paine as this icon, but I'm not sure if they realize he was actually a radical liberal, and he kind of certainly railed against organized religion, any state religion, and even against Christianity. When he died in New York City. He was born in England, and he came to the United States only in 1774. And he was friends with Benjamin Rush, who was a Philadelphia doctor who was very active in the Revolution and the events leading up to it, especially in Pennsylvania. And Philadelphia, by the way, was the largest city in the U.S. at the time. It was bigger than New York City. But he was friends with Rush. They found a publisher for this pamphlet because it was really radical, what he was saying. And, because he continued that radicalism, he was actually like the crown of, in England they wanted to arrest him, and then he was arrested in France because he was going against the forces of Robespierre during the French Revolution. And James Monroe, who was the 5th president of the United States, pulled some diplomatic strings to get him released, and he came back to the U.S. where he died in 1809. But the funny thing about Paine is, because of his renunciation and criticism of Christianity, there were only like 6 people at the guy's funeral. But think about his impact, and only 6 people showed up for his funeral. So it's kind of funny when somebody, sticks to their ideological guns, that when people no longer have use for the ideology, they turn on that person. That's just my little editorializing, but yeah, noteworthy life. Common Sense. If you haven't read it, it's worth a read. Okay, so I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit about numbers. Now, let me preface this by saying that my good friend Lyle over at No Hippie Trucking and Transportation, he always says, I don't give out numbers because there's always variables and they're kind of personal and everything like that. And he also is opposed to the idea, and as am I, of people saying, oh, I made, $10,000 last week. Because it really is, if you're only going to drive a truck for a week, then making $10,000 is great. But I don't think any of us are in trucking for just a week, We're not gambling, right? We're in it for the long haul. We're not just trying to turn a quick profit here and, flip this truck, basically. Like, oh, I'm gonna buy a truck, drive it for a week, make 10 grand, and then, get out of it. So that's first preface. The other preface I will give is I didn't have as good of a year as I had as I would like. However, However, and some of that's due to mistakes I made, but a lot of it's due to the fact that I just took a lot of time off last year, and I haven't been shy about that. And as I said when I first came to Prime, if I could take more time off than I was able to do as a company driver, which I certainly can, and only make as much as I was making at GP Transco, I would be happy. And for the record, I did a debrief when I left GP Transco, and I think I was like on track to make about, along with my 401k, the matching contributions, I think I analyzed my total comp would be around, I think it was around 83,000. I would have to go back and look at the video, but anyway, I was like, hey, if I'm only making that much, because my wife was happy with that money, but I can take more time off, like I could increase the time off I take by twice as much, then the functional equivalent of that is I'm making more, right? I work less, make the same. That means, because time is money, I'm actually making more per hour worked or per mile driven or whatever. So with that in mind, let me just go through these numbers real quick. I haven't done an exhaustive breakdown, and I'll give you some footnotes, if you will, or qualifying statements. So last calendar year, so 2022, I ran the truck. I shouldn't say because I had trainees on the truck, but the truck ran 129,257 miles, okay? Which, if you think about the fact that I had trainees on the truck, I had 2 long-term trainees, and then I had one other person that, well, actually 2, maybe even 3 people that were on for a short period of time. Because if you recall, I had a PSD guy that decided he didn't want to do this, and I also had a TNT student who decided he didn't want to do this. So with that in mind, 129 is not a ton of miles, I don't think. So my gross revenue from line haul, this is just line haul, was $231,001. So line haul revenue was $1.78 per mile, average of $1.78 per mile. I also had other revenue of $79,818. So that's fuel surcharge, that's detention pay, that's shuttle pay, like if I took a trailer from one place to another that they needed done, whatever, extra stuff that I got, okay? There might have been some holiday incentives from around the new year last year. And so that's what, I apologize, I forgot to add this up. Maybe I can do it quickly. So 231 and 79, 818, so 819, 0, 0. So total revenue to the truck, right at $300,000. So that's line haul plus other revenue. So then obviously I pay for everything, right? I pay wages, I pay taxes on those wages, fuel, maintenance, everything, right? Claims, whatever I had, whatever kind of came out of my pocket. And that ended up cutting that $300,819 down to, so this is what actually went in the company's checking account, $117,591. So essentially $117,600 for the year. That works out to be 91 cents per mile. So 91 cents per mile. One of the charges that I incurred, obviously I made my lease payments every week on the truck and the APU, fuel, all those costs that we talked about. And I've done a more detailed statement, but another cost that I incurred was $7,109 in mileage charge, right? But that's a holdback that you recoup if you complete the lease. So just to give you an idea, actually at the end of the year, there was $11,248 in my end of lease bonus, and I had $469 in tire fund. I had a lot more, but I actually had a puncture on a drive one time. So anyway, I would have liked to have been a little more efficient, and maybe had that, the mythical $1 a mile net to the truck. So, but I'm not disappointed. It is what it is, of course. But given the amount of time I took off, like for instance, I took 10 days right before the end of the year. I went on a couple of different vacations this summer. I went to Maine. I actually drove up there, but I met my wife up there. We went to Vermont. And I never don't, whenever somebody says, "Hey, Dad," or "Hey, Terry, can you be home?" I always make it home. So even for doctor's appointments or whatever I needed. I don't know the total number of days I took off, but I am very confident that it was at least 30, but probably more than that. And that's just at home, because sometimes I go places and I just want to hang out a little bit. Like, I did a video where I was at the Chicago Bears game, right? I did that, I didn't have to take that time off. I didn't need to take a 34. I just was like, I'm going to hang out. I talked to my friend and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" And I apologize if it got all, I don't know what happened here. Anyway, so, that's what's going on with that. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon. Bye.